And when I was learning English, I didn't intend to learn English. I just accidentally learned it. Because when I started playing video games in English, I didn't read anything. I could barely read Swedish. So my first Pokemon games, I was just walking through and not understanding the text. Then I started playing like PlayStation and PlayStation 2 games, which usually were in English. So I got to hear a lot of English. And eventually I just started understanding what it was. For example, I would repeat lines that I would hear in game, and sometimes people would tell me what those things meant. And then I would try to use them in actual conversations where I could use English. And then I just watched a lot of YouTube, and I watched English dubbed anime. That's how I learned a lot of English. I'm not even joking. So there was not a specific movie that I watched in English, but I did watch a lot of English dubbed anime, which is super easy to do these days. For example, with Netflix or Disney Plus, you can just change the language track. So even if, let's say, if you're watching in Sweden, it usually defaults to the Swedish language. But if you just change the language, you can change it to English, you can change it to French, you can change it to Korean, you can change it to Japanese. And if you know the movie by heart, or if you keep the subtitles on in your own language, or change the subtitles to the language that you're actually watching in, that's another good way to learn. Pokémon på svenska, ja mannen! Nu tänker jag bli allra bäst. If you want to hear a lot of like native expressions, watching NIJISANJI EN is a pretty good idea. I'm not a native speaker, but I've been told that I use a lot of sort of like idioms. So if you want to learn that kind of stuff, then I guess it would be handy to watch me. I've seen some translation channels occasionally use me as an example to learn things. For example, I know there was a video that talked about learning etc. in English, but they pointed out me as, instead of me saying etc., I say, you know, all that jazz, all that stuff. You enunciate well. Do I? Do I now? サスな言葉も勉強になる. Yeah, if you want to learn sussy words, then you might want to go to someone else. You use a lot of big words. I salute you, sir. Do I? I feel like I mess up big words then I use them. I've heard that my English is easy to listen to, so that's good. You speak ESL friendly. Maybe in terms of enunciation, but when it comes to actual vocabulary, maybe not. Sometimes I become very Swinglish. Bro, your English is better than mine, for real, for real. It's not the first time I've heard that said about Swedish people. I know that Jamie Oliver did an episode in Stockholm where he was talking about Swedish cuisine, and he was talking about, he went to an indoor market in Stockholm, and where they were selling like fresh fish and fresh like meat straight from like the butcher and everything. And whenever he would ask questions, they would always have a specialist in whatever they were selling on location. And they would just communicate to him in fluent English. And then he just leans into the camera and goes, the great thing about Swedish people is that their English is better than mine. Even went down to the docks and was like little kids. They could have been older than like 8 or 9 years old. They were fishing in the canal in Stockholm. And kids being 8 or 9, they also speak English. Because we learn English at a very, very young age. I didn't realize you weren't a native speaker when I first started listening to you. It's usually people with English as a second language that think that. People that are from the UK or from the States, especially from the States, they can usually tell, yeah, English is not your first language. You do not sound like you grew up speaking this language. So I'm always like, dang it, what do I gotta do to change that? Do I need to get a dialect coach, maybe? Ow, I hit my foot again. ESL solidarity, let's go! I've heard accounts from so many people from other countries who moved here desperately trying to learn Swedish, but the Swedes always insist on speaking in English. Yeah, the reason for that, in my opinion, is that Swedes, we are good at English, but we never get to use it because almost nobody over in Sweden like speaks English. Like we all just speak Swedish with each other, so speaking in English would just be weird. So whenever we do get somebody coming along that does speak English, speaking English back to them is like really exciting. Swedes are just like, oh my god, I finally get to use my skills.